Binyamina, Israel, is like a taste of heaven on earth. Its streets are calm, its neighbors are friendly, its backyards are sprawling, and its food, its farms are fresh and delicious. I know this because when I worked at a B'nai B'rith camp back home in Alberta, I became very close friends with one of the Mishlachat, an Israeli staff member who grew up in that small, quiet, peaceful town in northern Israel. Since then, almost a decade ago, her family has hosted me and my family so warmly on every visit to Israel, her parents even taking me in as their own when I lived in Israel on various occasions over the last 10 years. Because that's what our people do. We treat each other like family. We are family. So you can imagine that when I heard of the 4 soldiers killed and dozens of others injured in a Hezbollah drone attack on a Golani training base near Binyamina on Sunday, I immediately thought of and reached out to my friend to check in on her and her family. When she confirmed that the attack was isolated and that none of her immediate family was in harm's way, I typed out a response. Thank God your family is okay. But I couldn't press send. Sure, her parents and siblings were safe, but our family, the Jewish family, is not okay. When one of us hurts, we all do. Am echad, lev echad. One people, one heart. Have you ever noticed that numbers in Judaism all have significant spiritual meaning? 40, 10, and 7, for example, are numbers that represent the completion of a unit or a cycle. 40 years spent in the wilderness, 40 days spent in Noah's Ark, the number 10 for a minyan, the minimum number of Jews that it takes to pray as a complete and whole community, 7 days of the week, a complete cycle between Shabbat and Shabbat. Maybe those numbers are our most common numbers that we think of when it comes to spiritual and ritual meaning, but I've always been intrigued by how often the number 4 comes up in Jewish life. There are 4 questions, 4 cups of wine, and 4 sons at Passover. There are 4 corners of the talit. There are 4 species, arba minim, that we gather and shake on the holiday of Sukkot. Pirkei Avot teaches that there are 4 types of students among those who sit before the sages: a sponge, a funnel, a strainer, and a sieve. A sponge soaks everything up, every last word. A funnel takes in at one end and pours out the other. A strainer lets out the wine and retains the sediment. And a sieve lets out the flour that you don't want and retains the choice flour. When we take this metaphor and apply it to 4 different types of learners, of course there are way more than 4 different types of ways of learning. In fact, we might each have within us different moments or different learning subjects in which we are more like a sponge and others in which we are more like a funnel, or anywhere in between. The 4 questions, the 4 cups of wine, the 4 children at Passover Seder teach us that there are not only 4 types of knowing, of learning, 4 types of people in the world. Rather, this series of 4 is meant to represent the totality of the human and Jewish experience. It represents who we are as a whole, accounting for and metaphorically including each of our unique habits and ways of being and thinking and learning and doing. Every day as we prepare to say the Shema, we gather the 4 corners of our talit in our hands and pray that Jews dispersed across arba kanfot haaretz, the 4 corners of the world, might one day be gathered together like our tzitzit. But we know that the earth doesn't have corners. The earth is round. So perhaps these 4 corners, this number 4, is not supposed to be literal, but a metaphor. Maybe the 4 corners represent inclusivity, totality. 4 corners are a metaphor for what spans the entirety of the world and everything in between. 4 represents Jews around the world. It represents us all. Like the 4 questions and the 4 corners, a rabbinic midrash teaches that the biblical commandment to gather and shake these 4 fruits of a beautiful tree, these arba minim, during the holiday of Sukkot, is actually a metaphor for the banding together of the Jewish people. Just like the etrog, the citron, which has taste and smell, so too our community has among us people who have great knowledge in Torah and who use that Torah knowledge to do good in the world. Like the dates of a palm tree, represented by a lulav, have taste but no smell, so too there are Jews in our community who are Torah scholars, but who don't necessarily use their Torah knowledge to make a positive difference in the world. Like the myrtle or hadass, which has smell but no taste, some of us may not know a whole lot of Torah, but we might do a whole lot of good in the world. And the willow, or the arava, which has no smell and no taste, represents those of us that have no knowledge of Torah and no good deeds to speak of. The arba minim, the 4 species, represent all of us. And what does God do with these species representative of the totality of the Jewish community and our Jewish experience? God commands us to bind them together. If even one of the representative 4 is missing, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of shaking the lulav on Sukkot. Several years ago, I stumbled across an Instagram post by Humans of Judaism. Their account hosts a visual collection of uplifting Jewish stories. The photo shared was of a young Haredi man holding the 4 species tightly together in his hands. When asked by the photographer what was in his hands, the young man explained it's a myrtle branch, a willow branch, a palm branch, and a citron. They symbolize the 4 types of Jews. The photographer asked, "Can you hold them apart a little bit so I can see them more clearly?" To which the young man replied, "They're supposed to stay together." The Jewish people are intrinsically connected to each other. Not only is our fate bound up with one another, but as different parts of the whole, we need each other to be full, to be complete. Scholar and spiritual leader Michal Biton has returned several times since October 7th to a sermon given by Rabbi Soloveitchik in 1956. She's still finding relevance. In that sermon, Rav Soloveitchik asks whether the dispersion of Jews across the world, The ensuing diversity of Jewish customs, languages, and ways of life has caused Jews to cease being one people, Am Echad. Is the Jewish diaspora one or not? Are we still a we, so scattered, so different? To explore this question, Rav Soloveitchik invoked an obscure Talmudic story, a Talmudic inquiry, in which the rabbis debate the status of a person with two heads. Should he wear one pair of tefillin or two? Should he receive one share of inheritance or two? The rabbi's question is both legal and spiritual. They want to know whether this person is a single or a multiple being. So too, the Rav asks, we should ask the same question of the Jewish people. Are we one or many? In order to answer this dilemma, the Rav suggests that the way to determine whether the man with two heads is a single entity is to pour boiling water on one of the heads. If the other head, whose face was not melted with boiling water, screams in pain, then the two-headed man is a single being. If not, then they are two individuals enfolded in one body. This painful test is the test of peoplehood. This is the test we are experiencing right now. Though we are not defined as a people only by our shared suffering, halavai, we have certainly felt more unity over the past year with our shared pain and distress. We are not separate entities. We feel each other's joy. We feel each other's pain. We cannot be held apart. When one of us hurts, we all do. Our theme for the high holidays this year is Am Echad, Lev Echad, one people, one heart. This past spring, I was traveling on my weekly route from Toronto to New York, commuting between Beth Tzedec and the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I'm completing my studies. As I was boarding the plane, a Haredi man in front of me dropped his boarding pass. I picked it up for him, and we got to talking. He asked me what I do in New York, and I hesitatingly replied that I am training to become a conservative rabbi. He could have responded in so many ways. He could have ignored me, brushed me aside. He could have spoken condescendingly to me. He could have even argued with me about women in the rabbinate. Instead, he simply said, Am Echad, Lev Echad, one people, one heart. The events of October 7th certainly reminded us of that if we forgot. Sukkot, this holiday that we are in the middle of, is about joy. It is Zman Simchatenu. We are commanded to feel happy on Sukkot. This year, Sukkot and happiness feels like a challenge of forced dissonance. How can we find joy in this impossibly dark moment? May we hold our arba minim, our four species, this Sukkot, and be reminded that only together, only by holding on to each other, can we find comfort. Only together can we find strength. Together, we can lift each other up and learn to rejoice again. Chag Sameach.